Welcome, everybody. Episode 157, Two Chaps, Many Cultures. And there's only one chap. Well, the second chap will be here shortly. Just hang tight. Because we're all working from home somehow. Some of us work from on the road, and it takes them a little bit to get into the studio. So stay tuned. We have somebody here today that will tell us about what this remote work and working from home means for our creative juices, how it may have to, or it might mean how we need to reinvent the way we work with each other so we can be as creative, if not more creative than we've ever been. Stick around. Hello, everybody. Good evening or good morning, depending on where in the world you are. This is another episode of Two Chaps, Many Cultures. And it is, if you're in North America, it's a late episode. We usually don't do that. But sometimes we make those concessions because we have fans and friends and contributors from all around the world, in this case, on the other side of the globe. And we can't just wake them up in the middle of the night to come onto the show. And today I am joined by another second chap. You won't believe it. It's not Brett. It's Darren. Welcome to the program, Darren Menabney. Where in the world are you joining us from?
Hi, Christian. And for me, good morning. I'm calling in from Tokyo, where it is just past 9 a.m. And I'm great to be here and happy to be an acting chap for now as well.
Excellent. We promoted you immediately from guest to co-host. And
I'm honored.
Darren is living proof that there is a tomorrow, people. It is already Wednesday. So
yes,
no matter what you might
think,
you come to us from the future. It's beautiful. And those of you watching this live or the recording, doesn't matter. Let us know where in the world you're dialing in from. We want to hear from you. This is not just a too-many distribution. We want to hear all those voices and recognize everybody who's watching us and has their insights and ideas and comments and questions. And the headline for today is, how do we conjure up creativity in that remote work scenario? Darren, what qualifies you to talk about this? Tell us a little bit about what makes you such a remote work expert.
Thanks, Christian. So, I mean, I've been living here in Tokyo for 10 years. Originally, I'm from Toronto. Spent most of my life working in the federal government in Canada. Now, in the last, and some of that was working on kind of virtual teams, remote teams, but mostly domestic within the country as well, of course. Since in the last 8 years especially, I've been working as my day job at Ricoh Company Limited, and I've been leading a lot of our global HR programs. So Ricoh, for those of you unfamiliar, we're a multinational IT company, office automation, printing, digital services, about 90,000 employees around the world. So it's a big company. We're in over 50 countries. And so I first joined to look after our global employee engagement survey. Since then, I've been leading other global project teams. And so again, you have, like we were experiencing earlier, multiple time zones, multiple cultures, multiple functions. So leading those projects and learning from what worked, what didn't work, has given me some, ability to talk about the subject, and as well teaching. I teach for a business school based in Tokyo, called Globis, Graduate School of Management, and that again, even before COVID, we were teaching remotely. I was teaching online courses on critical thinking and a course on innovation from virtual teams. So there you go. And third one, IDOU. For those of you who are familiar with IDEO, the design thinking consultancy, I've been part of their teaching team for the past few years. And again, that's an entirely remote, asynchronous and synchronous teaching platform where we're talking about design thinking and storytelling. So a lot of my, multiple hats I'm wearing basically revolve around this idea that we do need to work remotely. And like you said, in many ways, we can be more effective when we're working remotely than when we're working co-located or even in a hybrid environment as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for putting us on your map, so to say, to make sure that we understand your coordinate system of expertise. And I came across an article you published, I want to say right at the turn of the year, about that very topic, about being creative in this remote work reality that we live in. And you made the connection to artificial intelligence, and you kind of busted the myth of, well, isn't AI going to take away from our human superpowers, and are we not going to make ourselves redundant even faster now with this remote work scenarios? And if I'm not mistaken, if I understood that article correctly, you make the case that nonsense, AI is there to, or will eliminate gradually those robotic or manufacturing production level jobs. Yes, that is something we need to consider. It will not necessarily affect the creative work, the human superpowers that we still exclusively. Am I paraphrasing this
Oh
uneloquent
yeah,
enough, or
very eloquently. Thank you. Yeah, very well. Yeah, I think you know, uh, I think AI automation, it's more about taking away or replacing tasks than jobs. And it becomes an issue when some jobs are all about doing one task. The famous example being, truck drivers, for example, as well, with automated vehicles. But I think automation AI will free us from these mundane, repetitive, administrative tasks, right? Like, who needs to be good at Excel anymore? If a lot of Excel can be automated by machine as well, that can free us up to do the stuff that we can do, that we're really good at, that for now, at least in the foreseeable future, machines are not good at. So we have more time to be more creative. And I often talk about the example of storytelling. There's something else I really feel passionate about. It's something that we are very good at, this kind of empathy-driven, emotion-driven communication, telling stories. We have more time to work on that. So, bringing that in our work more will free us up. And so it's a collaboration. What machines automation can do will complement the work, the creative work that we can be doing as well. Way back, I think it was almost 4 years ago now, I wrote an article for Fast Company about AI and storytelling, how they work together. And I think even now we see that even more coming through in terms of creative work. So yeah, I think if anything, this is a good news story. Tasks will be replaced. Jobs may be replaced, but they will also be created. We often forget that part of the equation, that while jobs are being destroyed, disruptive innovation, new ones are being created at the same time as well.
Karen here asks she would love to see the article. Yes, and I posted it in the link, or I posted the link in the comment box below. So hang tight. There's one
and
here.
There's one more related one on Fast Company from December, which is about how to making this case about how it is actually we can be more creative when working remotely as well. So you can share that link to the Fast Company one later. Yeah.
Put that in the chat box as soon as.
Thanks. Thank you, Karen, for that.
Good question, Karen. So you'll find the link on all the channels we're distributing here. So as you know, we're sending live here on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and on YouTube on multiple channels. So if you don't get the link right away, then ping me or ping Brett or ping Darren directly, and we'll be happy to share that with you. So did I hear that right, Darren, throughout your career, whether it be at Rico or teaching at Globis or in the IDEO consortium, so to say, remote work has been you long before the pandemic forced a lot of us to think that way. Is that right?
Yeah. I was using Zoom before it was cool. Not that it's cool now, but and Slack and all these things as well, as we all were, right? But I mean, these tools, they've been around for quite a while, actually. And a lot of the research around remote work and work from home, it was in place at the right time, I think, as well. So especially for remotely teaching an MBA program, while we were teaching some courses remotely, some of them we had to move everything remotely. There were some adjustments needed there as well. So yeah, I mean, I think in terms of leading global projects, which many of us have been doing for years and decades as well, we began thinking of it a bit more intentionally, maybe, I think around 4 years ago. That's when I began kind of thinking a bit more intentionally. Well, we've been doing this. I've been doing this for years. How to help other people get better at it? And that's when I made this pitch to the MBA program at Globis about creating a course around virtual teams. So we created a course called Innovation Through Virtual Teams, which is all around, again, like the title says, how to get more value from our remote work, how to harness the diversity of remote teams, and things like culture, how to manage culture when you have diverse teams, and get innovation from that as well. So it's been a learning process, and like everything else, after you do something for a while, you want to help other people maybe get better at it as well. So kind of my mission now is to help people get better at this stuff. Yeah.
Do you feel that teaching in Japan with maybe a largely Japanese audience, I guess at your company it may be more Japanese leaning audience, at Globis I'm not sure what the student population is like there, but would you say that Japanese audiences are more welcoming to this remote work style, or the remote creative process, than, let's say, European or South American, North American audiences? Do you think there's a cultural element there?
There's definitely a cultural element as well. I mean, in terms of teaching, it's probably 50-50 Japanese and non-Japanese that are based here in Japan or overseas. In terms of at Rico, my immediate colleagues are pretty much all Japanese. The project teams are mixed. Now, from the cultural aspect of Japan, I've heard a lot of people were uncomfortable initially with the move to remote work, because I think in Japanese traditional, I'll use that word a lot, traditional Japanese corporate culture, a lot of it is being present, and presenteeism, of course, being a negative aspect of that as well. But so I think that helped a lot. That was a big challenge for a lot of people around a year ago. I mean, at Rico, we were really well prepared also, because we had originally been planning to spend, you remember the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, which may happen this year? We were originally planning to take.
I don't remember them. I hope they will happen.
Yeah, it was a parallel universe. We were planning to take the whole company across Japan. Those 2 weeks would be work from home. So we did a lot of rehearsals in preparation for that. In 2019, even in early 2020. So we were well positioned for that as well. That being said, I think some people were still uncomfortable with it, because they didn't think it was going to be for 2 months and then 3 months. It's been almost a year now. We've essentially been working remotely as well. But after the initial shock of not being able to see your colleagues all the time, and how do we manage people differently, how do we track work differently, I think Japanese culture was a little bit, in some ways, harder initially to embrace it, because of this corporate culture that it is around strong teamwork and being together and working together, going to lunch together, drinking together after works. That was a challenge initially at work, because I think Japanese culture, relationship building, is very much about the personal relationship building, whereas maybe North American culture, we're more inclined to build relationships, of course, personal as well, but also about the work stands for what you do. It's more maybe cognition-based trust as well as the emotional-based trust.
Yep.
Whereas here in Japan, the balance is more towards the emotional-based trust and the cognition trust.
But you'll be surprised, there's several Central European cultures who have this fascination with presenteeism. So I have a lot of German clients, a lot of small, mid-sized enterprises, and I work with their subsidiaries here in North America oftentimes, and the North American offices, like they were ready to embrace this work from anywhere concept long before the pandemic hit, always banging their heads against the wall with the head office in Germany, saying, no, your warm body needs to be in a seat, and we need to be able to make sure that you're actually there, and we pay you for the time you are physically present. And so the US-based employees recognize, there's some friction here, and especially the German employees that worked overseas were like, why are we still doing this? We're still getting results.
Right.
Why are they making
expats have a different view? Yes, always, yeah.
And it's still, I sense this, it depends on which industry we're talking about, but there's still, especially if it's a producing organization, they have a
manufacturing company,
they still push everybody to come to the building, not necessarily to the office, but if they're working on the line, then it's unavoidable, right?
Sure.
But back to the creative juices and conjuring those up, what are some of the experiences or the lessons you've learned working remotely? How can you, what tools do you use, or what strategies do you use to get that ideas bouncing around process started?
To get started, I mean, you really, the kickoff, we've talked about, of course, remote work, the importance of doing the kickoff and getting to build the trust early in the team. In creativity, innovation is really intimately tied to trust and psychological safety. So you really have to build that right at the beginning of any project team is launched. And if you have an existing team, reboot it, relaunch it, whatever. We would do that when we had a co-located team that somebody's working remote. You have to do a kind of a remote reboot to have the trust built in different ways. When you've got that trust and psychological safety, then you can begin thinking more about the innovation and creativity. So, things like any global project team I lead, for example, I want to get a sense of the work styles of the people on that team. So we talk about diversity, and this is one behavioral and cognitive diversity, or work style diversity as well. So, who's a night owl, who's a lark, who's a morning person, right? Who's the introvert and who's more towards the extrovert, who's strategic, who's operational. You ask people to kind of, on a spectrum, fill these things out. What's your strength and what's your superpower and what's your kryptonite, for example. Building up awareness of the team and sharing that among the team is a great way to build trust from the beginning as well. And again, even if you have an existing team, try this out. Have a bit of a virtual reboot or a re-onboarding of your team. Yep. These are some things you can do to build and rebuild that psychological safety. It's not just a one-time thing to be doing this.
How do you assess those superpowers, kryptonites, and those characteristics and cultural predispositions? What are some of the instruments that you have found useful for that process?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the spectrum one, it would be entirely, self-reported. So it's not going to be the most accurate thing in the world. But it's just, if you're going to say, are you a morning person? That's a bit of an easier one. But introvert, extrovert, strategic, operational, yes. But in terms of, and of course, you could probably get some assessments for this as well. In terms of what I also do for global teams is I like to use the culture map framework from Erin Meyer, right? And I just ask everyone to fill out, there's a link on Harvard Business Review, 24 questions, fill that out, share your reports to me, and I will build up a cultural profile of the team. I also do this for the MBA students in the class, the innovation class. They're working on different project teams, build up a profile for the team, see the diversity in, who is the high context versus the low context communicator, how do people see conflict as a positive or negative, as a disruption or not. And that's a bit more, there we go, yes, exactly, right? Yeah.
Since we're talking, so if you're wondering what he's talking about, that's the book that Erin Meyer's portfolio, or
it's a great framework, yeah.
I mean,
so that's one tool, yeah.
Really good. I like this as well with our clients. A tool that we use frequently is called Globsmart Profile, a tool. And there's a free version online that might even be helpful in that process. So if anyone out there is curious about these various cultural or personality tools, shoot me a message. I'll be happy to point to the resources out there. There's good stuff out there. There's a few nonsensical or let's say outdated models out there that I wouldn't necessarily send you to first, but there's materials out there that you can use with your organizations on that mapping out process. So you do this with your MBA classes as well?
Yeah. So for the course, the Innovation for Virtual Teams course, it's an MBA program, so it's case-based, and it's a term project, 3 months. So we put them into project teams of about 5 or 6 students. 5 to 7 is the kind of nice range. And then for each of those teams, I'll ask them to do the culture map questionnaire, give a cultural profile to the team, and say, basically, work with this and incorporate this into your project. How are you going to account for this? Because it is part of any a global virtual team. That's the phrase we use a lot of GVT, a global virtual team. I mean, a virtual team can be in the same city, or we're experiencing right now the same building even. But when you have different time zones, countries, cultures, you add a different dimension to the complexity of managing a team. So by doing that, they're learning how to be aware of cultural differences and manage them by managing it themselves within that project team, and then they can take that back to their day jobs. And when they're working on their own global teams, being able to manage it a bit more effectively and get more value, innovation out of their own teams that way as well. We have often find this discussion where everyone says, well, look, on the dimension around disagreement, we're all close together, so that's a good thing. We're always going to agree. Yes, that's great. But when it comes to creativity and innovation, do you want people who are always agreeing and agreeing the same way. A lot of innovation and creativity comes from disagreeing and positive conflict, task conflict. So there's pros and cons to these things, and by building that awareness, people can get better and see a different view, which often is cultural. Again, non-confrontational cultures, hierarchical cultures like here in Japan, sometimes you have to break through that to be able to pull out that innovation as well.
So to answer, I mean, you all began answering Karen's question here, but what are other ways you can define creativity, and how do you find a definition that works for everybody on the team if it's such a diverse group?
Yeah, I mean, I often talk about innovation and creativity. I mean, they're very related concepts. Some people say one's a process and an outcome. Some people say innovation is the process, and some say it's creativity. But I think at the end of the day, it's creating something new, which could be an incremental change, right? Innovation doesn't have to be the light bulb, the iPhone. It can be an incremental change. So a new process or product or business model or idea, a story, making a PowerPoint deck can be a form of, I find, creativity as well, because you have to take you have to create something new. And creativity is not the purview only of so-called creatives, the people who say we were creative. See, well, everyone is creative to some extent. We just often forget about it because we don't ask enough questions and we have too many assumptions. Like, I think it was Picasso's famous quote about we should all be like 5-year-olds and keep on asking more questions. And we forget about these things as well. So creativity is not necessarily, isn't a business context, maybe to answer Karen's questions. We're talking about creativity in creating a new business process, product, model, whatever it is that can help your innovation or your customers be that much more successful.
Or a delivery vehicle for cultural intelligence information, like this program.
Perfect. Yeah.
Right? I mean,
right. There we go. Yes.
Myself a creative, but going by your definition, then being on the show, watching the show is stimulating your thought processes, and you ask questions if there's something you want to drill in deeper, like Karen just did. So I think
as an FYI, in the 10 minutes before we were here, I did made a few notes, and it gave me the idea for 2 new Forbes articles. So there we go. Thank you. Cool. The creativity was even flowing before I joined. So thanks for that.
So we get a preview of those Forbes articles. Do you have the working title in mind?
Well, one is going to be around hybrid teams and innovation. So that's something I was thinking about. But also related point, the role of the role of conflict, innovation, and introverts. How introverts can thrive on remote work, because some of the things we talked about as well. When you don't have you're not brainstorming with a bunch of people live in a room, which can be intimidating. Introverts can shine more, and I talk a little bit about that in the I think that Fast Company article. But I want to dive deeper into that one, for example, as well in a future article.
With your Japanese colleagues or students, where we're speaking up in a group isn't necessarily a rewarded behavior in traditional Japanese culture. Have you found that remote work is now bringing more voices to the conversation? Because
very much, yeah, because you have a lot more ability. So we often associate creativity in a business context with people in a room with post-it notes and everyone's putting things on the wall and stuff, and that's creativity, right? That's brainstorming. But the asynchronous aspect of creativity, the one where you're not in the room, if you're someone who's an introvert or you're a deep thinker, that's where your creativity comes from. And I think in Japanese corporate culture, where it's often quite hierarchical, people will not speak up if the boss is in the room. But now what I see is my colleagues are a lot more willing to we use Microsoft Office. Teams is now, I think, one of our great sources of innovation, because people are just chatting one-to-one and getting new ideas that way as well. Part of that's back to the trust point earlier as well. So I really think this is an example, and thank you. This gives me a new dimension to the article about how the culture can play into it as well. And this is for hierarchical cultures. This is a way to be more creative as well. When I do cross-cultural training in RICO, for example, when we have a brainstorming session, okay, here's your team evaluation using the culture map. How can you work more effectively? I often ask the managers to not be present for that in the discussion, take them out of the room, because people are going to be in any organization, people are going to be more open when the boss is not in the room. But in a hierarchical organization, much more of an issue. So sorry, manager, could you please leave for the next hour? They're pretty good about that too. They get it.
That's good. So you taught them well, so they accept your.
They know why. Yeah.
Yeah, accept your authority on that, so to say.
Sure. Yes.
Now, I, you told us that you are originally from Canada and worked in government. I think I remember you were not born in Canada. I think you were born in Northern Ireland, correct?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So talk long enough and you hear a bit of the accent will come out. Yeah. So
Yeah.
when I was 4, the family moved to Toronto. So, I mean, I was, that's why I kind of consider Toronto to be my hometown as well, right? I spent 4 decades or so there. Yes. We won't get into details about age, but yeah.
So 10 years or so in Japan.
Mhm.
The first time around, or when the first year, maybe for those of you who out there think about maybe working in an Asian context, or who may be afraid of doing that because, oh, Japan, and it's so different from everything else that I know. How hard was it for you indeed, and what were some of the myths that you were told that didn't manifest at all?
Yeah, this is myths. Wow, that could be a whole hour in itself. But I think one, the challenge, one thing I was lucky is when I came here. I should have mentioned this. I came originally as for the first 2 years as an MBA student at Globis, where I teach now as well. And so I was able to absorb slowly Japanese culture, especially business culture, that way through the cases to working with my classmates. So in 2 years after I graduated and I began working full time at Rico, there was this transition there. That being said, I think if you are going to make that kind of jump to a very different culture like that, having, how can I say this? Really know deeply why you're doing it, right? And don't just think of the surface reasons. You must go really deep to your motivations, and think. One of my favorite tools of anything I teach or talk about is the 5 whys from Toyota, a Japanese company, of course, right? So why are you moving to country X? Well, because I like the food. Okay, I don't know. Okay, I want to enjoy the culture. Well, why do you like the culture? And you go deeper to what make it about yourself. Really, why? And for me, I look back on my career. I look back on even what I liked as a kid. And I look back at my study at university. I studied astrophysics, for example, of all things. I'm doing HR now and figure that one out. I've always been curious about. I've always liked exploring and things that are far away and distant as well. And so, getting that core idea about why you're making these moves or why you're doing this makes a huge difference, because it's kind of your anchor. I think, it gets back to the point about what's your passion for. Mine is for things that are far away, passion, differences, exploration, frontiers.
So the astrophysicist was aiming for the moon and landed in Japan. Is that?
Yeah, the rocket fell a bit short. Yeah, as well. So I often joke, if I had, you've seen the movie Arrival.
Oh, love this one. Mm-hmm.
So I often joke that the job I am most qualified in the world for is that job, because I studied astrophysics. I do cross-cultural stuff. I used to work in science and technology. I used to work for the government in the Defense Department, very secret stuff as well. So throw all that together. If we ever get first contact, I'm the guy to contact as well.
Or were you Amy Adams in that movie?
It's been a while. I'm not that good at languages, so I wouldn't say I'm the Amy Adams character, maybe as well. But we'll get we're getting to this point. But I mean, back to your question. I think the motivation, intrinsic motivation. Back to employee engagement. What is your intrinsic motivation for doing these things? That will help drive you as well. Now, Japanese culture. Things that surprised me is that my previous in government, I had some interactions with the Japanese government, and I was in the Canadian government, and that was quite formal, very hierarchical as expected. But what I hadn't appreciated so much is the public versus the private way that people work in business. And when you, again, take the boss out of the room or you go one-to-one, it's a very different kind of business interactions and relation and trust building. And it was a bit easier for me when I was able to make that transition from the big group environment to the 1-to-2 or the 1-to-1 environment of people as well. And that's how I found much better progress there as well.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you spent 10 years there now. Probably it would be safe to say that you enjoy working and living in Japan, and that you manage that lifestyle well. What will be your number one tip for anyone engaging with Japanese in a business context for the first time? What's the most important thing to consider?
Yeah, I think for a business contact is don't mistake a bit of a reluctance or coolness or reticence for lack of interest or lack of passion, I guess. So, they're often, I think, in initial meetings, especially, because again, back to relationship building, Japan is very much a building relationship from trust and getting to know someone offline as a person. But often preliminary meetings, first meetings, could be extremely formal and may seem like the other person is not even interested, but it's a first meeting as well. And take the time to build that trust, and don't be too emotional, or, well, not too emotional, but don't be too expressive in your own meetings as well. You can narrow that gap a bit more, I think, if you do that as well. And that's how you begin to make those inroads and build trust. And again, in Japanese decision making, again, traditional corporate tends to be very many layers, consensus at many layers. So things take longer. That shouldn't dissuade you as well. If it's still going on, it's a good sign as well. So I think this patience and putting yourself in their shoes, not dropping on assumptions about what is the common sense way to do business, like any other cross-cultural business interactions. But I think really that's going to make the big difference when beginning to interact with a Japanese business partner.
Now, I would be remiss if I didn't ask this, where this program was launched out of pandemic lockdown, and this got us creative to do something like this, right? So case in point.
Yeah.
But I would be remiss if I didn't ask you this. So we're a year in now into this crazy world. How has Japan, how has Tokyo fared? How have you fared through this time of health uncertainties?
Yeah, it's been just over a year now that we began working full-time remote, and we still are as well now. So I think someone who loves remote work, for me, was an easy transition that way as well. For Tokyo and Japan, I think like any out in the world, we've had a lot of sad cases, a lot of deaths, but the numbers are lower relative to other parts of the world, and I think we've been kind of lucky that way. For whatever reason, Japan has not had many cases, despite here in Tokyo, 30 million people, the biggest city in the world, with also a high number of elderly in the population as well. So we have been fairly lucky. Not if it's luck or plan, but for whatever reason, it hasn't been so bad here as well. We haven't have full lockdowns. We had voluntary lockdowns, and people here have been really good about obeying those and following those lockdowns as well, right? Mask wearing is just part of the culture here as well. So there was that, never an issue there as well. So I think, it's been, it hasn't been a great experience, but compared to other parts of the world, we have been quite lucky here that we are able to, within reason, go out and eat out and get out of the house as well. But again, still working from home is the norm for many of us as well.
There's a lot of talk about, especially here in the Western world, a lot of talk about this concept of loose culture versus tight culture, and how tighter cultures might be navigating the pandemic much better, because the overall consensus in society is that there is a greater common good that we're all working towards, and there is this maybe a stronger sense of rule obedience. Would you subscribe to that logic, or would that be too easy of an explanation to explain why Korea or Taiwan or Japan are doing quite okay given the circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, it's not the only factor, but I'm sure it's part of the explanation. Whatever the reason is, there's a lot of complexities involved, but I do think that is one of this. There is there's pros and cons to having a very cohesive culture that way. But tight? Did you say, and loose? What was it?
Yes, tight and loose. I think Michelle Gelf is coined those phrases, or that developed that framework, and she wrote a book about it, and she is a pundit on TV shows and talks about that. So that's what I'm borrowing.
Yeah. So I mean, I think I would just say that definitely in Japan that there is culturally there is a predisposition to follow the rules and to follow the advice of experts, and also it's not quite the same, but I think in Japan there is a great culture of consideration for other people and not inconveniencing others. That's one reason the masks are worn even before COVID as well, right? So I think that's played a huge factor. Whatever the reason is, or the factors that have made things relatively not as bad in Japan, that's definitely, I think, a huge part of it as well. So again, voluntary lockdowns. The government in Japan cannot enforce a lockdown. It's all voluntary here as well, and people have been pretty good about it.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to hear that you're safe. I'm grateful that you took time this morning. I know you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Get to work.
Yes.
And I really appreciate that. People, be creative. You heard some great advice on how to make that happen. I like the idea of mapping out the different personality and cultural types on the team in order to set the baseline for the work going forward. Darren, really appreciate your taking time here. How can people find you? What's the best way to connect with you?
So, social media, LinkedIn or Twitter. I will have my own personal website up one day, and also check out my articles on Forbes and Fast Company. So I think those are the best ways. But to get in touch, I think LinkedIn is probably the best way.
Excellent. Darren, arigato. I hope that's the way to say it.
Thank you.
I didn't bend at the hip. I'm sorry. I'm doing it all wrong.
I'm bad at that. So no worries. Yeah.
What, 10 years in? Really?
Yeah. Won't get into that this conversation.
I was taught by my coach once that you have to keep a straight back and bend at the hip, right? And
that's very true as well. Yeah. So I know about it. Practicing is a different issue. Yeah.
Oh. Well then, thank you regardless.
Yeah, thanks for the time.
Nobody will ever know. And I wish you a very healthy rest of your week. Thanks, everybody. Tune back in tomorrow at a different time than today. And tomorrow we'll have another one of our how-to episodes, so with practical advice. Look for the announcements on the social. You will hear it and you will see it. And we will be live again tomorrow. For now, ciao, ciao, arigato, and auf Wiedersehen.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.